Welcome to this session of the Reference Desk. It's the weekend of the 4th and 5th of June in different parts of the world. And today's session is featuring the work of Brett Zamir, Bahai9, a Wiki site. Brett did his education around the Illinois area in teaching and has worked in teaching English as a second language or as a foreign language. Currently resides in China, but he's also in the IT business. He's trained in IT and has a considerable record of experimentation with web design. And as Brett tells you, he has collaborated with a number of the other participants in this series. So Brett, welcome today. We look forward to hearing from you. I'll hand over to you and you can share your screen and tell us about Bahai9.
Thank you very much, Graham. Great to be a part of this presentation series, and it's wonderful to have such a series to highlight some of these efforts. Hopefully I can get this screen sharing smoothly enough here. Just a second. Recording. Oh, okay. Okay, I've prepared a series of videos that explain this in more depth because like the Billy Joel song, where he says that, you know, they were the best years of my life. It was a beautiful song, but it ran too long. If you're going to have a hit, you got to make it fit. And they cut it down to 3:05. This is kind of the experience I feel trying to cram all of Bahai9 into 1 hour, which is, I mean, it's a wonderful idea. And I know not everybody is going to be interested in all the nitty-gritty details. So I've prepared this other set of videos, plan to share them on bahai-library.com. Already have some uploaded to bahai-library.com/Zamir/videos. But for this presentation, I'll try to keep it a little bit lighter, and also feel free to interrupt me if you like, and I'm happy to try to customize the discussion more. Because of some issues with the video recording quality, I'm going to be trying to coordinate my sharing of the video that I've already recorded, which I think will be more efficient to present to you. But I'm going to try to do it at the same time as I live load some of the websites that it mentions. Hopefully that'll be okay. So let me get started. Questions raised by the Reference Desk series. So today I'd like to give you first a brief overview of the site bahai9.com, indicating some of its types of content and key features. After that, I'd like to give you a brief introduction to how a wiki is navigated, specifically the media wiki type of software that we are using on bahai9.com, and how it can be navigated by users, editors, and administrators, so that you may gain a better feel for how the whole process works. I plan to then introduce you to what general goals, inspiration, and justifications guide us, and highlight how Bahai9 differs from other similar presentations, works, or institutional projects that could exist. I'll give you a whirlwind tour, providing sample types of content on the site, while at the same time attempting to illustrate what our goals and site policies are, as well as draw your attention to what I think are some interesting pages or points that may be found within the pages on the wiki. After introducing you to specific pages and our goals and policies in that process, I hope to be able to give you an overview of the nature of our financing and governance, the origins of our site, and how the site's goals have changed over time. I should then be able to provide some information on how the site is being used. And I can also show you how Bahai9 is being used in conjunction with other tools and sites. Finally, I should then be able to indicate what I believe to be the project's general successes, challenges, some of its shortcomings, major to-dos that are left, and anticipated future as a project. In giving you a general idea of the types of content and features of the site, I will give a brief overview and offer a brief comparison and contrast with a well-known and similar compilation, Lights of Guidance. This might help make clear how our site is similar and different. I then intend to give you a brief sampling of the content of the site, navigating through different pages using some of our major dimensions of categorization, as well as introducing you to a few of our lesser used means of categorization that might still be of interest. With a taste of the site, then it should be meaningful to then introduce you to what special features and benefits the Bahai9 site as a whole offers. Now to introduce the project. Bahai9 is a repository of organized quotations, and to a lesser degree, it is also a compendium of materials that are closely derived from the Baha'i writings, such as study outlines or links to study outlines. For those who are familiar with the Baha'i reference volume Lights of Guidance, Bahai9 is very similar to Lights of Guidance, but in addition to having the advantage of being available online, Bahai9 is collaborative and can continually grow to host more guidance. We, in fact, include all of Lights of Guidance within Bahai9. So if you want to consult Lights of Guidance, you might just wish to search or browse through Bahai9. We've been expanding Bahai9 with some of the ever-growing in number letters from the House of Justice and other sources as well. So it can offer more than you might find in the print edition of Lights of Guidance. The site also allows us to expand into other topics and offer new ways of organizing the same material as well. In the process of organizing our quotations, we have come up with 4 main dimensions of categorization to get at the content. Subject, protagonist, also known in a larger sense as entity, or even a more generic sense as being organized by part of speech. Get to that in a little bit. Time order, and types of material or writings. These are our main dimensions of categorization. The subject or fields of study categorization follows the divisions set up by Abdu'l-Baha in Chapter 3 of Some Answered Questions on the kinds of education which the manifestations of God are qualified to bring to humanity. Material, the human, and the spiritual. The human includes intellectual activities, the arts, and the sciences. Note that one might also help oneself recall these categories as body, mind, and spirit. Of course, these 3 categories overlap with each other. For example, prayer is considered a spiritual topic, of course, but it can also be seen as material in the sense of the sound waves that are recited, or it could be seen as human or intellectual in terms of our speaking the words and its interplay with human psychology and our thought. But we try to categorize within the area where they are most salient, especially from a Baha'i perspective, and allow reaching the topic from different directions. So we could categorize it in different areas of the subject if we like, but make sure that it's at least in one of the more salient areas. To look at just a couple of examples for now, looking at the main page. Sorry, I have to toggle to the browser just a second. You see my screen? Here are 4 dimensions here at the top: subject, type of material writings, protagonist, and time sequence. A subject we also subdivide into material, human, and spiritual. Those just will bring us down the page. So we have here by topic. These are all considered topical dimensions. So looking under our subject categorization under material or material physical, we see theoretical and applied fields of study, physics, medicine, finances, exercise, relating to the body or the physical world in a more salient, direct way. So let's take a look at medicine. Now we've gotten past the topic list, so the content pages. This is a quote headings. We can look at these in the table of contents here on the right. Wikis, this is usually shop, but we put it here on the sidebar so that it's always accessible to you. We expand it to see what it looks like. We see our hierarchy. So this page, we see various quotes here, such as on the importance of Baha'i studying the field of medicine. We see information about God giving healing, but through doctors. We see other topics on the page. Now going back, to the main page. Let's look at a sample under the human category. Pertaining to intellectual domains of the human mind. We have fields like math, psychology, linguistics, art, history, law, etc. Now, if we go to psychology as an example, we can see some quotes in a variety of topics within the field. Here are some of the central topics that we have. Orange links means the page has not been created yet. So if we click on a page like the topic of ego or self, we can find some more quotes. For example, we can find out that there are different kinds of self used in the Bahai writings. For self-mastery and awareness, the key is forgetting ourselves. Otherwise, we'll be actually less likely to find ourselves, and a variety of other topics. And going back again to the main page, our third subcategorization of subjects is spiritual, ethical, religious. Under this spiritual categorization, we see some of the duties or practices of the faith, such as prayer and fasting, teaching the cause, giving to the fund, etc. Let's say we pick one of these as bringing oneself to account. We not only find here the probably more familiar quotations of Baha'u'llah about this from the Hidden Words, but we also find a quote of Abdul Baha on the need to bring ourselves to account every morning. I think it's interesting as an aside that people assume tonight seems to see the quote on me about adding up our accomplishments is here at the end. The need to ask God for forgiveness of confession. We can see the C also here if we wanted to find out more about the prohibition of sins. Main subject, human and spiritual. Now, if you don't care for this material human spiritual categorization system, on the main subject, there's a link for the subject itself, which is the main area. And by subject, in addition to the three subcategories we mentioned, also added a Dewey classifications. Though this only really applies currently at the very top level, but if you wanted to browse through this categorization, you could do so. Frankly, I am not as much a fan of this system, even though it's a more standard system, because I see it as a little bit less internally consistent than what we use. For example, in general, the Dewey Decimals study as their primary focus of categories. But then they have a field called language, which would, I think, be more reasonably categorized as linguistics to remain consistent among the other groupings which relate to fields of study. Language, you don't find a department of language, generally speaking. At a university, you'd find it as linguistics or literature, so forth. However, that is not to say that language is not a useful category within a dimension distinct from field of study. That question, in fact, brings us to our next major dimension, where instead of looking at the field of study, we do look at particular entities, or we might call some of these antagonists, when they're human at least. Language is one example of what we might call an entity, as it fits under the concept of entity as a kind of noun, person, place, thing, or idea. Since we are often concerned with humans, though, we've ensured that we're listing protagonists as a particular dimension on the main page, even though it itself technically belongs to the higher level group of entity, where entity is more suggestive of inclusion of non-human nouns. The grouping of entity or protagonist is added as a top level category to group not by field of study, but rather as a grouping of a certain kind of noun. I originally actually intended to repurpose the word protagonist to fit any kind of noun. The Universal House of Justice, too, has referred to individual, community, and institutions as protagonists, even though in some sense, institutions are not people. So I felt we might bend the word a little and take advantage of the word sense of being about something which is currently a focus of our interest. It's not just describing something, but specifically that is under our current focus. However, one of my collaborators felt strongly that protagonists ought to be limited strictly to human beings, or at least sentient beings, so as to avoid an impression of abusing the word. I more recently settled on entity in the hopes that this word may better reflect that the dimension can include a person, place, thing, or idea. We might not normally refer to ideas as entities, but I think it might still be the best option. Although nouns are the more common way we may wish to examine terms which are independent from a field of study, we do also have a classification system based on the other parts of speech too. So technically, entity has an even higher level grouping by part of speech. But these other non-noun groupings are not really as major or likely to be as frequently used. Although this part of speech dimension can cover as many fields as a subject-based grouping, and arguably even more, since there might not be a field defined for every subject per se, at least not precisely targeting it. This kind of part of speech, entity, protagonist dimension can hold the advantage that it is typically less language dependent or less dependent on educational ability, as it does not depend on knowing the precise scientific term for a field of study. A person wouldn't need to know the term psychobiology, for example. They could just look up the intersection of brain and life. And admittedly, the name entity or protagonist itself is a little scarier to the average user, but the grouping at least lets one find not only subjects like medicine or psychology, but it has the advantage of finding subcategories of people like doctors or locations like hospitals or things like the brain or concepts like healing. And as a concept itself, medicine is a valid entity since it is a concept noun, but then we're really back to fields of study. So unless we're speaking about medicine as in herbs and drugs, then that probably would not be normally considered as an entity. We just look at fields of study. Now, such terms also have the advantage of helping us to focus our attention to specific people or entities rather than to a generic field of study, which doesn't encompass specific people or entities. A field of study, though, still has its value. It is, as mentioned, kind of like an entity, but is specifically an entity which is considered notable enough to have its own discipline. Now, a person might try to innovate, linguistically innovate within fields of study, such as creating new fields such as cat studies, if you were interested in cats specifically, or people studies to indicate that your field of concern was people in whatever dimension, or progressive revelation studies to take an example of a concept. You could get very specific. These kind of terms could make up for the fact that one might not find these terms as formal fields of study with the university department, but one disadvantage might be that our brain might just simply find it easier to think in terms of the more concrete topic as the entity rather than a field of study. So for example, cats, people, and progressive revelation might be just inherently more safe to the human brain rather than the more abstract cat studies, people studies, etc. So getting back to our examples, within entity or protagonist, we see groupings like individual, community, and institution. We get a chance to review prophets or individuals. Individuals would be non-prophets in the faith, famous persons, for example, that are notable Baha'is. Now, if we go to the prophets page for example, we can see a listing of manifestations of God with pages for each of them that lead to information on their status. For example, we see a quote here on Joseph having been a manifestation of God. Note that this page on prophets is distinct from the subject that is religion. Another protagonist might be by location, people by race, by country. For example, we have quotes on praise of people given in the writings by their country. And we also have a dimension of time sequence or time order. Space was made in this category for timelines, but as we limit ourselves to the writings or authoritative and semi-authoritative sources, to have enough material to cover the history of the faith would really be limited to quoting from just a few works like the Dawnbreakers, God Passes By, and Traveler's Narrative. So time is a much more frequent need on the likes of other Baha'i wiki sites like Bahaipedia. I plan to explain more later about why such basic top-level content as this isn't very well developed on our site at Bahai9. But just to give you a few examples, if we go here to historical accounts events, we also see there's Baha'i calendar. If we go to historical account events, we can see we have such subtopics as writings, specifically the writings on the accounts events by date. We can go to specific figures, the details of Baha'u'llah's life by date. So you can see there's just a few sections cited here. Now, if you remember, our policy of the site is that we only stick to quotations or closely derivative works from the writings. It shouldn't be so surprising that the content here in our timeline is rather sparse. This could still be expanded, as mentioned, from quotations from Traveler's Narrative. But bear in mind, this is not Bahaipedia, where articles on history are more the norm. Going back here to sequences, as one of the items under time sequence, time order, This introduces the storing of information which follows an order, but not necessarily chronological, or not necessarily with chronological information. For example, we have a link here to places visited by the Bab. This links to a page which gives closely derivative information, links to the sources and the Dawnbreakers and God Passes By, which include the places that he visited, but it doesn't give a timeline of this. Going back to sequences, we see there's a sequence of teaching, which suggests an order in which to present the teachings of the faith that's recommended in the writings. Specifically, you can see that the sequence involves the idea of proving first the existence and oneness of God, and then establishing the validity of the past prophets. There are other kinds of sequences as well, such as the sequence of a person before entering the faith, that someone should not be expected to know too much or too little. And the other points include the fact that when introducing the laws, they should be done gradually in a sequence, kind of a process probably more, but nevertheless, just going from the point of introducing things step by step. These are just some points that are suggestive of an order of not doing at least too much too soon. Introducing the book Baha'u'llah in the New Era before the Igan is just suggested by Shoghi Effendi and so forth. Yet another form of organization related to time order. These are patterns of activity and priority or rank. We can cover those more later, as right now we're just trying to get through the overview of the main dimensions. Just to review, those were by subject, which is like field of study, entity, or part of speech, if we wanted to go even higher, time sequence or time order, and one other above this, which we haven't mentioned yet, is type of material and writings. Note that the writings pages are pages here, these sacred writings pages. These are pages about the writings, such as quotations which encourage that a particular book be studied. If a book is interpreted or discussed elsewhere, we also list these interpretations by page or paragraph number. So for example, if we go to the writings of Baha'u'llah here, pages on that, and then we choose the Kitab-i-Iqan, we might scroll down and find at the bottom that we have a table of information of notes on the different topics of the paragraph, cross references to other writings or other notes. So we have two Quranic sources for one of paragraph 147. In Lights of Guidance, we have an interpretation related to this verse. Similarly, we have other quotations from Lights of Guidance about paragraph 213 and so forth. And then you can see we have other books listed of the writings of Baha'u'llah here. We have also different ways of organizing this. We have the Library of Congress method, the extended Library of Congress. I should have said from the Baha'i World Center. We should probably rename this to be expanded out, but it could kind of become a long title. You can get information about a particular work through here as well. Let me share my screen to the other, back to the. Can you see the keynote presentation?
Yes, thanks. We can see it.
Okay. Zoom. We also have alphabetical ordering or quick index. The alphabetical looks like this. This is. Oops, I need to go back again. You seeing my the main page again?
We've gone back to the main wiki page.
Yeah, okay. Alphabetical, start with quotation marks and go to letter A, so forth. All the pages on the wiki, which are in the main namespace, being the regular articles, not the help pages or talk pages and so forth. That's not included here, although you can search outside of the main namespace as well. We also have the quick index, which is similar to the alphabetical listing, but rather than starting at the very beginning and having to scroll page by page, you can jump down to alphabetical letters of interest. So if I wanted to do starting from letter O, good number of entries there. As to some more specific examples of by parts of speech. These can include by relationship, the relationship between two subjects, somewhat like a conjunction or preposition. Sorry, let me get back my place here. We can search outside of the main namespace as well. We also have the quick index, which is similar to the alphabetical listing, but speech. These can include by relationship, the relationship between two subjects, which is somewhat like a conjunction or preposition, the role of these parts of speech, that they indicate a relationship of some form. And we can describe the exact nature of the relationship under the by relationship. They also could be actions, such as verbs. It might also be descriptions, which correspond to adjectives or adverbs. And by emotion, which would be like our interjection. To just take a closer look on these specific pages, we might have take a look at by relationship. You can see as, for example, relations of majority and minority, relations of believers with the assemblies. You know, these could be special areas of interest when you want to really contrast two different things together. Of course, those kinds of descriptions could go on the individual page, like the page about assemblies, but it may be of interest to and helpful to find it here in its own listing. By action, we have maybe different actions listed. Of course, right now we don't have very many listed, but just a couple samples we might add here. Smoking is an activity, gambling, you know, things that relate to verbs. Okay, we can take a look at by description. Right now, we don't have very many. We have attributes of God under virtues, colors being adjectives. There are some writings that speak to the symbolism of these colors. This is not saying that this is necessarily Baha'i authoritative position about the color, just it mentions that there's an Eastern saying about it. For interjections, currently we have one page under this category, which I call Taboo, which is really more of a sense of revulsion. So I've added under the category revulsion. For example, certain writings which speak of certain topics which are so morally repugnant that you could consider this in a sense as an interjection. Okay, then we have some other categorization schemes that include an automatic listing of our formal categories. We haven't really covered that yet, but each individual page at the bottom could have added to it any number of categories. You can see, for example, we go to covenant breaker. The category has two individuals within this category. If I go to one of them, there's a Yahya, we see that the bottom of the page has him labeled as a covenant breaker. So that's why he shows up in that category. Drugs have different pages on drugs. Household, Islam, individual, and so forth, many different ones. Although this area is comparatively undeveloped, as we've tended to use the main pages as category pages. So for example, for the writings, there's a page just called writings, and this is effectively like our own curated category page. Whereas these formal categories, which we can talk about more later, these are more automated. As you can see, all it does is it lists the topics within the page. And in addition to listing all the categories alphabetically, we can browse by category, which is hierarchical. Okay, we have our similar dimensions as on our main page. Are this the classification suggestive of part of speech, our fields of study, time order, and the type of written material. These are really the main categories that we want to go by moving forward. Now, when I brought up my complaints of the Dewey Decimal System, you may be thinking, even if you agree with me, that there are stronger benefits to adhering to a standardized classification, where conceptual purity might have to be sacrificed in order for adhering to a standard which is more well-known and reusable. Indeed, in a recent session of the Reference Desk series, the group discussed the central subject repository in the context of bibliographic data, and as desirable as I'll admit central subject categorization can be, with some content, sometimes it is desirable to offer alternative classification systems for the sake of more choices in the nature of discoverability, and especially if the systems are internally consistent, and particularly if such folksonomies may make it easier for the average user to discover new content than, say, a more formal technical classification. There are, of course, advantages to shared, well-known classifications, though, but on a wiki, we can offer more than one form of classification anyways. There's another issue that is raised by this notion, which I'd like to bring up here because it is so critical, I feel, to good, clear organization. That is the notion of faceted browsing. Faceted browsing or classification is a strategy classification where any given dimensions should be comprised of mutually exclusive components, where those components, though, are nevertheless of the same nature for comparison. For example, if you were going to make a faceted search or faceted filtering tool for purchasing homes or renting homes, one might group those homes by price, which would be one dimension. And within that dimension, you should only have price ranges. And the ranges should not overlap with each other. They should be mutually exclusive. So you might have $1 to $100,000, $100,000 to $200,000, etc. Similarly, if you were to set up a style dimension, you wouldn't allow such a grouping to include descriptors like modern and classy in a faceted classification system, because you could have a modern home which was also classy. And remember, the groups should be mutually exclusive. Instead, you might have a dimension on the time period, such as modern and classic. As far as the word classy that we mentioned, you might not want that as a grouping anywhere, since that might generally correlate with price and be more subjective. But if you nevertheless wish to use the term classy in an attempt to group styles by perceived tastefulness, you could still use faceted browsing by having a dimension style which included items like gaudy, classy, and run down, as long as they were considered mutually exclusive. And indeed, these might generally be accepted as mutually exclusive within the dimension. And such a grouping would meet the other condition for deserving its own dimension, because it might indeed be independent or roughly independent of any other dimensions, such as price. It might correlate with price roughly, but it may still be independent. For example, you might have an expensive house which was either classy or gaudy, or it could even be run down if, for example, the property were valuable. Note that although I mentioned that using overlapping terms like modern and classy on the same dimension might be problematic for faceted browsing, one might still find them within a useful, undifferentiated folksonomy. Users might come up with these tags, and a website might display all the tags, including these non-mutually exclusive tags, and might arrange them in such a way as to be only grouped, perhaps to appear larger if they were heavily used, but not otherwise being arranged in a dimension. Despite such undifferentiated folksonomies being useful, to come up with a system that can be collaboratively refined over time, which communicates clearly to both editors and users what should go where, faceted classification can, I think, better ensure that the tags don't grow without organization or grow too large in number, with the exception that a faceted system might allow for aliases and redirects or see alsos, which could lead the user from these different overlapping terms to more internally consistent groupings. As mentioned, the dimensions should also generally vary independently enough from one another, or otherwise there is little need for new dimensions except as aliases. So as mentioned, you probably don't need price and fanciness as separate dimensions. So coming back to our topic at hand, our dimension of subject really tries to stick consistently to a field of study within its immediate subgroupings, with nothing else mixed in. This helps make clear to editors what belongs in the dimension. In other words, basically it has to be a field of study. And it also helps make clear the kind of dimension a user will want to look in. If you know that these are all fields of study, but you want to look for a protagonist, well, then you better look at the protagonist entity dimension. Faceted classification is not only used for our major browsing dimensions, but also to ensure the headings at any given level within a page clearly grouped as well. So for example, if I go to our fasting page, we have here aspects of fasting, miscellaneous topics pertaining to the fast to-dos. Those are exclusive, but not particularly interesting. Then under here, we have general information about fasting, the applicability of it, the mechanics of it, and resources for it. Within our general information, we have the need to obey it, fast, the purpose of it, the motives we might find within ourselves to obey it, the rigors of the fast that exist, and bounties of the fast. So these are fairly exclusive of each other in general. Of course, there's going to be some interconnections, but when you look at the facets, you should be able to basically have an idea of which category you're likely to find your question of interest in. Now, faceted classification is not the only consideration to make when we're doing categorization, despite the fact that I've emphasized it. This is especially true because faceted classification doesn't speak to relationships between the dimensions. For example, if you were to have time as a dimension and psychology as your topic, and you wanted to refine psychology by time or time is by psychology, if you just have these two dimensions only, you won't know whether they're being combined meant that one was interested in the history of psychology, for example, as far as the development of the science of psychology, or if these two dimensions together was intended to look at the role that time has in influencing our psychology, how we perceive time, etc. So it is not sufficient for us to just have a few dimensions on the main page, such as time and subject, and then try to let you access every page from a simple combination of those dimensions. That would be possible to do in some way, but it might bring up a bunch of not very related connections together. Still, it might be interesting, but those are things that we can curate manually. So there is a need for regular hierarchical classification as well, not merely these dimensions at the top level. Now, if we were going to be faceted purists, we would have each major dimension available at each level of the hierarchy. But generally, at the more deeply nested levels on Bahai9, we end up subcategorizing more based on what is easiest and fits with the available quotations. Still, it can be useful to reflect on whether a major dimension would be useful to add at any given nested level of the hierarchy. While browsing the psychology category, for example, reflecting on the existence of other dimensions such as protagonist or entity might help a person editing the categories to realize that, hey, we might need to add some terms, or we ought to add some terms like psychologist, psychiatrist, or even redirect pages like shrink, so that we could let users more easily find not just psychology quotations, but we could even make sure to orient the pages to focus some particular quotations that deal with the psychologist, him or herself, rather than speaking to states of mind of those who seek out psychologists. Now that you have a little sense of the site contents, I can introduce you to what I see as some of the benefits of the site. Though we'll cover more benefits as we cover specific pages and policies, I'll just summarize now a few of the features I view as key. Number one, based on the site policy of changing screen. Do you see the keynote?
Yes, type of content and site features.
Okay. Content to quotations or closely derived works based on the quotations, there should be little filtering of the actual teaching. The intent is that you can come to Bahai9 and get directly from the source. Number two, by organizing by topic, there are real opportunities for exploration beyond just what you might first think to search. And organization is a key part of what we try to do. Number three, the site often uses official or semi-official sources, which nevertheless you might not find readily quoted elsewhere online. For example, compilations such as Star of the West or Mahmoud's Diary are considered authoritative or semi-authoritative, and yet they're not often quoted. So you might miss out on some of the interesting guidance that those sources contain. So we always trying to incorporate more from those sources as well as the more traditionally used sources. Number four, there are really some very interesting and subtle topics that you can get into when the compilations you're making are community expandable. They can extend not just new sources, as mentioned from the House of Justice, for example, but the topics you can analyze from different angles. Now, for example, one subject I thought was interesting is the responsibilities we have on the question of, can we raise concerns with our fellow believers about them if we feel like they're stepping against the covenant in some way? Baha'is are understandably not eager to step on others' toes and interfere in their lives, but there are a few quotations that suggest that in some circumstances, if you consider it wise, you may be able to broach these concerns. For example, this topic is an interesting one. It's something you might not find a whole compilation about normally, or you might not discover it within Lights of Guidance or whatnot, but it may still be interesting. So when you compile information with different editors who come up with ideas on how to expose content, it may find more interesting topics. Now,
okay. I'll just stop for a moment and pause and see if anyone has any comments or questions on the content so far. Okay, if not, I can just go on then to some of the goals of the faith as but from a more negative point of view, as far as addressing potential objections that some in the community might have about why do we need this in the first place. Just 1 second. Okay, I think I'm going to have to skip over the intro to the wiki, but if we have time at the end, I'd be happy to, if people were interested in knowing how wikis, what's available on wikis, I could show you some of that. Otherwise, I can refer you to the longer videos. Okay, here's some of the inspiration. I'll play this now.
although I plan to give more detail on our explicit goals later on, I wanted to start here about goals more from the angle of justifying from the Baha'i writings what we were doing, addressing some potential objections that might question why we needed to be doing any of this. The need for activity on the internet and organizing quotations may seem pretty obvious to a scholarly audience. But the quotations add authority, which might be used by this audience to both provide inspiration and to help allay the concerns of a wider range of believers. As to our general goals and inspiration, which we'll discuss later, while those are stated in positive terms, I plan to address specifically the common categories of objections that those working on wikis or Bahai9 may encounter. I engage first in such a negative focus because sometimes we best appreciate the value of what we're talking about, such as quotations, when we consider where and with whom they are needed, and not reading a quotation in isolation, but considering the kinds of arguments that a given quotation is addressing. We may then better appreciate the quotation itself. Some non-technical, perhaps older Baha'is might imagine that the internet, as far as Baha'i activity, is just a haven for covenant breaking. Yet the House of Justice says otherwise. There might not be many such believers anymore, especially as time has gone on, but there still may be influence in a few pockets dampening energy on internet activities, and this may be disproportional in a few quarters. Here's a quote as an antidote to such thinking. And these quotes can also be found on Bahai9's internet page. By the way, the House of Justice will continue to encourage use of the greatly expanded opportunities for the discussion of Baha'i concepts and ideals which internet communication so marvelously provides. And from the International Teaching Center, there are many knowledgeable Baha'is involved with the discussion groups who help provide accurate information about the faith, as well as thoughtful ideas. Some might accept the benefit of internet activity, but might believe that quotations get in the way of individual interpretation. But as per the writings, both in the process of teaching and deepening, there is recognized an explicit need for focus on the writings in such discussions, including among Baha'is. The following quotes can be found on the internet or memorization pages of Bahai9, though here we're using it with a slightly different focus on the need for quotations in general, regardless of whether they're memorized or just shared. The friends should read the writings and be able to quote from the tablets when discussing subjects pertaining to the faith. Surely the ideal way of teaching is to prove our points by constant reference to the actual words of Baha'u'llah and the Master. This will save the cause from being misinterpreted by individuals. It is what these divine lights say that is truth, and therefore they should be the authorities of our statements. This, however, does not mean that our freedom of expression is limited. We can always find new ways of approach to that truth or explain how they influence our life and condition. The more deep our studies, the more we can understand the significance of the teachings. In the cause, we cannot divorce the letter from the spirit of the words. As Baha'u'llah says, we should take the outward significance and superimpose upon it the inner. Either without the other is wrong and defective. And from a quote on behalf of the Universal Source of Justice, the ease and relative impersonality of the electronic medium require in some ways an even higher level of self-discipline than is the case in situations where a spirit of unity is reinforced by the opportunity for direct personal contact and social interaction. In the pursuit of such a unity, Baha'is will, without doubt, wish to assist the consultative processes by sharing and discussing relevant Baha'i texts. This will itself have the further effect of drawing attention back to the framework of Baha'i belief. So there's nothing here that someone using a quotation is automatically parroting and not thinking, etc. These arguments ought to be dispelled by the quotations above. Ironically, yes, they are quotations, but now some believers might accept the need for quotations, but only believe in the need for raw memorization. They might see little need to organize the writings, believing that's something up for individual believers to do on their own. Yet here is what Baha'u'llah himself wrote, with Shoghi Effendi citing it, the institution of the archives. I imagine Baha'u'llah, though, may have been speaking perhaps even more broadly than Shoghi Effendi's purpose in highlighting the role of the archives. Just my personal opinion, but I think it may speak to the desirability in general of arranging the verses of the writings in order. Spiritual souls will assuredly emerge from behind the veil of divine protection, will gather together the tokens and verses of God and put them into the most excellent order. So this is not suggesting the writings are already in the most excellent order in all cases. This is calling on spiritual souls to do so. There can be an impression sometimes among Baha'is, though, that the order of the writings in every case is relevant and important as they are. They think that the hidden words may have a completely important order in every case, or other writings. But other writings explicitly reject this. Here's a quote on behalf of Shoghi Effendi. All divine revelation seems to have been thrown out in flashes. The prophets never composed treatises. That is why in the Quran, in their own writings, different subjects are so often included in one tablet. It pulsates, so to speak. That is why it is revelation. And this quotation on behalf of Shoghi Effendi. The hidden words have no sequence. They are jewel-like thoughts sent out of the mind of the manifestation of God to admonish and counsel men. Now, if the quotes are not revealed in a meaningful fixed order, why should any Baha'i insist that they are and suggest that they are not in need of organization? The above, of course, doesn't mean that there is no coherent order within certain tablets or books of the writings, or that there is no benefit to reading certain books in whole. Abdu'l-Baha and Shoghi Effendi, in fact, both advised that certain tablets and books be studied and mastered, or in some cases memorized. There is a quote implying in positive terms that people could move from study of the Quran by subject eventually into a study verse by verse. So the order does hold some importance in some cases. But again, the fact that some works have their own consistent order doesn't mean that there is no role for subject compilations as well. Although the context was contrasting subject compilations with compilations separated purely by author, Shoghi Effendi did speak of not being fanatical in avoiding subject-based compilations. He, on the contrary, suggested that it would be necessary to have them, even though he was at the time speaking of the general guidance that it may be preferable to have separate volumes for each of the authors because of their difference of station. And the organization seemed to have been enjoined on the generality of believers in some cases. In particular, Abdu'l-Baha stated, for example, in one quotation, these proofs ought to be collected and memorized. As soon as someone will ask you, what are your proofs? You may cry out at the top of your voice and say, here they are. So again, the role of collecting is not left just to individuals. An effort is encouraged for them to be collected. Now, some might accept the need for memorizing and organizing the writings, but they may think that such an activity is just to be left to individuals or institutions perhaps to do so, and think that there's nothing for them to do in assisting sites such as Bahai9. The same applies for believers who might think there's no need for them to disseminate knowledge working with other believers on the likes of sites like Bahaipedia. Yet, the writings state, as Abdul Baha said in a tablet, help along one another's projects and plans. Of course, this doesn't give special privilege to our projects. This is an encouragement for mutual assistance. But the point being that we should help one another, that Baha'i activities should not be relegated to individuals always working on their own or waiting for institutions to do everything. One of our biggest problems with Bahai9 has been finding collaborators, even though many individuals make their own compilations. The nature of wiki work is collaborative, yet Baha'is by and large at this time do not seem adequately persuaded to assist. Yet the House of Justice states to us, it is by strengthening their dynamic relations with one another that their powers are combined and multiplied. Abdul Baha explains that the more the qualities of cooperation and mutual assistance are manifested by a people, the more will human society advance in progress and prosperity. How can this not apply to Baha'i initiatives as well as to other affairs?
Okay. So are there any comments or questions so far, such as on the section just covered?
I think there will be a lot of comments at the end, a lot of questions, and I think we're enjoying what you're presenting. So please, feel free to proceed, and we'll have discussion at the end.
Sure. Okay. Let me just summarize then some of the goals that I mentioned in terms of more positive terms. Second. Okay, as far as what are some of the principal goals of the site, love and unity, as with all Baha'i activities, is the primary goal. And although obviously the websites are not going to be sufficient by themselves to unite the world, the belief is that a clear-headed look at what our teachings actually say can help lend a greater force towards unity, reconciling people in the process. Abdul Baha said, for example, that knowledge is of love, and even though it may not be sufficient, it is one condition for true unity. Hopefully our site policies and moderation will also be conducive to true unity, combining openness with the adequate strictness to protect the covenant. One very significant barrier, I believe, that we have in regard to unity is that sometimes individuals will seize on only one aspect of truth, including religious truth, as in our writings, and might not assimilate all the points into a coherent whole. It's kind of like a recipe where the few ingredients are added to the mix and it fails as a result. Let me bring up my goals in summary form here for you too, just a second. Okay. Moving on. So presenting the full set of guidance on a given topic might prompt readers to look more clear-eyed at what the Baha'i writings actually say on a topic, and hopefully help them avoid cherry-picking, bulldozing, or dismissing truths of others on important social and theological issues that the writings cover, and also come to see any grains of truth that might exist for other sides. While hopefully everyone will be able to find more points, a diversity of contributions, both in terms of diversity of thought as well as of background, undeniably can help us make sure that neglected points are drawn out. A wiki allows this in theory, but it really requires more people to join and be trained if they're so willing. So it is the hope that Bahai9 can focus people back to the source of the writings, as we know is important for understanding any movement or faith, but particularly with the Baha'i faith, which lays claim to an infallible covenant and which rejects any kind of priesthood class. Not only are the Baha'i writings considered a higher source of authority than materialistic standards, but even in relation to the value of scholarship, the sacred writings are to preeminence for Baha'is. They are considered to be the standard that we are to look towards, even though, of course, all of those academic training and science can correct certain mistaken notions in the religious community and can provide great insights. Okay, but that being said, we do wish to expand intellectual development and capacity with Bahai9 beyond what the writings teach, hopefully expanding access to secular knowledge also by the fact of cross-linking to sites such as Wikipedia and Bahaipedia so that people can gain more background on what the scholarly community has gathered and what science may have to say about a particular subject. But the real goal, I just should emphasize, is for Baha'is to turn to the word as a first stop, and that to allow the unfiltered teachings to percolate in our lives and as we engage in daily personal and community living, in the arts, and scholarly and scientific endeavors. It is our hope that Bahai9 can assist in such a focus back to the writings on a diversity of topics. We also aim to provide a certain amount of meta information on quotes regarding the degree of authenticity. So, for example, there may be quotations which are pilgrim's notes, or they may be cited in a compilation from the Baha'i World Center, but they still are pilgrim's notes. There's a good amount of complexity in determining what the degree of authenticity is. Or, for example, also Shoghi Effendi has stated that promulgation of universal peace and Paris talks were good enough to be cited from, but that in the future, those talks which did not have authenticated original transcripts would need to be separated, even though they could still be used, but their status would need to be distinguished. I can show you here. I'll try to show you this, how we do that. Got too many windows open, so it's harder for me to find my screen here. Okay. Okay, so we have on such a page as this. This was an interesting quotation on immigration, but because the status was the Baha'i World Center could not find the original, and it does seem to be worded from a secretary at the end of the document, but there are other letters such as this, which have a PS and which seem to be written by the secretary also, but which are considered authoritative by certain quotations. But in this case, this one, the original could not be found, so it was asked to be removed from the compilation, but it still may be of interest because one might wonder whether it could actually have some basis. So it's offered there in that form. We have similar cases on other pages. Ideally, though, we would be drawing from a common database, which would mark the status in the database and then extract it out of there. Trying to move along here a little faster. Let's see. So yeah, the status can depend on the work as a whole. Sometimes there are works like Abdu'l-Baha Divine Philosophy, which Shoghi Effendi felt it was problematic enough that it should not be reprinted. But nevertheless, there are some quotes that are included in compilations from prepared under the house, which do include them. So, and the research department mentions that quotes which are included by the house would stand to reason that these would reflect the spirit of the teachings, but that they don't change their status necessarily as pilgrim's notes, so they might not be authentic in every manner. Okay, as far as some other goals, no topic is considered too simple or complicated to include if it's addressed in the writings. So for example, even something like the roundness of the earth, we have a page on that for our flat earth friends that, we don't, that in fact, I even met one Baha'i who claimed such beliefs and seemed to have been struck by the fact that there was such a quotation about it. We have pages on conspiracy theory. There's some couple quotations which of Shoghi Effendi which seem to speak to a sort of conspiracy mindset. So the point is that the Baha'i faith is being for really for everyone. We ought to make sure that we speak to different kinds of needs, even some things that we might consider obvious, including such topics as, let's say, the reprehensibility of murder. These verses, we believe that they have the power to appeal to someone, whether it could be a would-be murderer or to change their heart or just to change an overly casual attitude that people in society might have towards human life. Another point I'd like to make is that sometimes a consideration of the commonplace details of life, one might be accused of being too literally minded by compiling all this together, or people might feel a sense of, oh, that we shouldn't be, religion should just be something airy fairy kind of thing. We don't have to address any specifics, or the Baha'i idea that literal mindedness is the enemy of everything. Per the Quran, for example, Muhammad said that he was not ashamed to set forth the parable even of a gnat. So the kinds of commonplace things in life, whether seemingly too commonplace of an example or whether because it goes into certain detail, is something we don't want to shy away from. So for example, if there are a number of details on how do we do our obligatory prayers, some people, because of their lack of intellectual curiosity or patience, they may say, oh, this doesn't matter. They may assert to us with their kind of folksy wisdom that these are not important, and but if they're set forth in the writings, which consider them important enough, and that which perplex certain minds, then why not delve into them? What they are considered by our institution. So, let's get at what they actually say. One example of this might be with the feast. Like, what's the sequence of the feast? I encountered one person at a feast that I tried to gently bring this up, and they told me that the sign of insanity is, is being too rigid or something like that. And I might have said that another sign of insanity is being too flexible as well. But no, but there can be a sort of a reticence to consider any degree of detail, and we try to get to the bottom of it, and not in a way that we hope people hammer the head over others with it, or that try to overemphasize minutia, but these can help to settle some sort of detail-oriented questions, hopefully. Sometimes also there's the phenomenon that in a quote, you may have a quote that contains multiple points, and maybe some of them you might miss. So for example, in a quote of Abdul Baha, which says, sorry, just just read it off screen here. Shed the light of a boundless love on every human being whom you meet, whether of your country, your race, your political party, or of any other nation, color, or shade of political opinion. Now, upon hearing this, a person might just pay attention to the more frequently quoted points about unity of race and, of loving people of every race, or unity of every nation. But within this quote, there is a few points that are less frequently made, mentioning love of people of color or shade of different political opinions. So on Bahai9, we can hopefully aim to bring that out more. Also, that may be instructive are points that may be missed simply because they're not typically arranged together. Let me find you this quote. I'll have to share my screen differently here too. So for example, we might look at the kinds of things which are mentioned in the writings that are encouraged to, at some level, to be done every day or every night. Now, these, not in some cases, yes. Now, some people may object this gets into a ritualism, that we don't want to have, be emphasizing ritual, as though that, sometimes the writings might have mentioned something only offhand about it, like, for example, reciting a prayer every morning. The research department suggests that, except for the obligatory prayers, that those prayers which mention that are not really intended to be recited every morning. So we can include quotations like that, which might correct some notion that some certain conscientious Baha'is might feel the need to recite a whole bunch of prayers every morning or evening simply because they mention that. But it's still, nevertheless, even if this is not to be taken completely literally, I think it still can be valuable and interesting to see what are some of the things which are mentioned in that level. So for example, the give thanks to God every morning might not be something every Baha'i might be familiar with, even if they're familiar with the idea of obligatory prayer. Or some mundane topics like cleanliness, the need to wash the feet in the summer every day. But these are practical matters, and especially depending on, certain cultures, or as Abdul Baha said in The Secret of Divine Civilization, he mentioned there are certain hapless souls, or I'm paraphrasing, that, might have been confused otherwise if these mundane matters had not been spelled out. And again, we're trying to aim for an audience of everyone. Another area might mention that maybe, that may help draw out the quotations better is there are some areas, for example, rank. We have listed a page for the writings of Baha'u'llah listed according to rank. So for example, the most holy book, the Kitab-i-Agan, is of unsurpassed eminence among the doctrinal writings. The hidden words are of unsurpassed preeminence among the ethical writings. The most momentous tablet is the Surah Muluk, etc. These can just help focus our memory and our attention to things in a way that perhaps, if they were left buried within long verses of God Passes By, we might not be able to rediscover them. Also of relevance is that we can, by creating pages, sometimes even if they have long names, or longer names, like history, the need to study, because, or dawnbreakers, the need to study. We can have a whole bunch of quotations about this topic, but rather than crowding it all into the dawnbreakers page, sometimes it comes up as a topic in question forums, or people ask, what are some of the books that are required to study, or so we can compile, when we compile specific pages that may seem to be very specific and may on one level seem narrow, they're also can be useful when considered in the world of, the extra click is death. The idea that sometimes in a discussion forum, people are you're lucky if you get them to visit an external page, let alone asking them to dig through, a long book to find something. Okay. Another area is in the Bahai9 aims to be useful is as a cross-reference. Let me see. Back to my other screen. Is it showing the keynote, I hope?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So, for example, we'll show our table of contents. As I already mentioned, that helps give a nice, bird's eye view of the page. Although that's available on any wiki, we really conscientiously try to ensure that our headings are well nested. Bahai9 includes all of Lights of Guidance, but we've tried to improve on make it even more nested, so that at any given level of nesting, there aren't too many, doesn't become too long of a list, so that it's faster to drill down. Okay, and then in addition, so we have tables that are sortable. On pages we list, as I showed you with the Agon, there can be by paragraph or page sections that let you find out what the writings have to say about a particular page of another writings. One of the shortcomings some people mention in their view of Lights of Guidance is they might say, well, this is taken out of context. Well, of course, at the time it was printed, it was inevitable it would be taken out of context, because it would otherwise have been too huge of a volume to include all the sources. But online, we can actually link to the original source. So to the extent that editors help us to do that, we can link back to the original quotations. And in fact, for new quotations, that's always our policy to do that, so people can verify. Everything should be verifiable, and that especially to English readers on the site, especially not having any regular Persian-speaking editors that we trust to do the job. We would want to ensure we have vetting for any things that, for example, I myself and my limitations could not personally verify. Okay. We would like to expand to identifying Persian and Arabic works, though, but again, mentioning the need for a trustworthy reviewer. The browsing by topic, search can lead you to a particular field, but let's say it leads you to a science field, like you're looking, if you search for physics, you might get to physics, but it might be more interesting to browse by science. Then you realize, oh, they have some pages on exobiology too. Let me take a look at that. Another kind of cross-referencing that is intended to be useful is with the Ruhi courses. I'm just kind of going through this quickly, but in the longer presentation, I can show all this in a little more detail. But the Ruhi courses can have their own pages which link to, so you can get more information on a topic that's covered in a Ruhi class. So for example, you read the quotation about truthfulness, the Ruhi page that we have will link to the truthfulness page, and then you can find out that it's actually more nuanced than maybe the discussion might suggest, that there may be a few circumstances, like a doctor lying to a little bit to his patients to encourage them to that they feel better, that there may be some circumstances where it's justified. but it's not justified even to save another person, or you really can delve into more detail. Already mentioned linking to Bahaipedia and Wikipedia. Also, it can be useful for having redirects that we can inform people about special scientific or scholarly terms, but we don't want to overwhelm them. So, for example, eschatology, bilateral symmetry, alkalocracy, we have pages or redirects for these concepts, but we also want to make sure that there are more familiar redirects and that the page itself makes clear what these terms are. So, for example, eschatology may make clear that it's talking about prophecy or and so forth. So, but we want to make it instructive to Baha'is to learn these terms more, who don't know the terms, and also facilitate learning and discovery for those who do. And then finally, there can be some redirects which operate based on naming, such as using terms that reflect hot button issues. So, for example, affirmative action. We have a page on that, even though we have a disclaimer to mention that the Baha'i quotations are not necessarily identifying strict favoring of policies in wider society. They may sometimes speak about the inadequacies of wider society, but it may be difficult for us to extrapolate. But nevertheless, offering the term that's familiar to people may be more helpful for them to discover the idea of administrative privilege of minorities in Baha'i administration without having to use such a long title, that less familiar concept as administrative privilege of minorities. Okay, and then finally, and this goes a little bit into the origins of the wiki. The wiki, actually, which I can cover a little bit more, was intended to be originally had its roots as a planning guide. I had at the University of Illinois, I've been working on a Baha'i College Club handbook with the intent that it could be useful for future college clubs. But shortly into that, I started thinking that, well, maybe it would be suitable to try to do this for the national level, to offer it at the national level. And it was too long for the National Youth Desk was considering a college club handbook, but it was too long for their needs. They kindly informed me. But I still started to, add to it, and was inspired by certain quotations of the House, such as mentioning that Baha'is should consider in each important area of one's life, and then make a plan in these areas of life. And so it started to thinking to me, though, what are the important areas of life? And really, if we really want to delve into it, we could say everything is important. So what do the writings have to say about this and this, such and such topic? So it kind of inspired gathering more details about what the writings have to say. But the orientation, I should mention, was not purely about knowledge. It was also with the intent that, that we really need to put into practice the laws. How are the laws characterized? How is the administration supposed to run? So trying to discover these areas of life and prompt us to action. Unfortunately, Wiki technologies is not very developed for the most part to allow integration with, let's say, a personal planner or a to-dos list, as I think would be ideal. But when Wiki technology came along, I thought, well, this is really something that is suitable, and therefore I put it together on the wikis. Okay, and got in touch with Jonah. I thought it would be nice to link from such a well-organized and attractive site as BahaiLibrary.com, and Jonah graciously allowed us to link to allow on, if you'll notice on his writings pages, they will link there's a link typically from the writings in the top right-hand side that says add or read comments or links related to the work here. And if you click the link, it will bring you to the wiki page on the writing, so you can find out more about it. And the idea is that while people are browsing the writings, sometimes they might not just wish to reflect on the writings themselves, but like to see what other authoritative guidance was gathered about it. And by going to Bahai9, hopefully in the future, increasingly we can link people more to Bahaipedia and Wikipedia, so that hopefully in an automated way, that's one of our goals, that you can discover that the same topic is available on the other wikis. Okay, take a little pause for a second. Okay, as far as site policies, let me get to that. On Wikipedia, there's a concept called neutral point of view. Now, this doesn't mean that to be infallible. They're speaking about the idea that any ideas that are expressed should be expressed from without favoring particular opinions. So, for example, Wikipedia that Baha'u'llah is a manifestation of God, but it could not say Baha'u'llah is a manifestation of God. However, on our site, on Bahai9, we're not limited to that concept. And in fact, we try to endorse what we call a Baha'i point of view. Of course, we can't perfectly claim authority. None of us are interpreters of the writings infallibly. So the idea is not meant to suggest that our point of view is perfect, but we'll simply, when we summarize a quote, if it says Baha'u'llah is a manifestation, the heading will just say Baha'u'llah is a manifestation of God. We no need to say that it's our opinion or something like that. Currently, I am the only, the final authority on the site. We don't have any institutional arrangements. I'm open to that, but there are a number of considerations that would need to be kept in mind if that were to happen, and there would be complexities of whether an institution even would want to be involved. For example, we cover a lot of topics that maybe, for example, on sex, or on whether they would want a topic on occasion preference to Baha'is, like certain cases where Baha'is, we should favor the poor in the brethren in the faith, or some negative quotes about the clergy. Of course, we should quote from the full writings. For example, Baha'u'llah praising those divines whose actions comport with their words. But still, an institution might be more inclined towards towards public relations, and whether they want to have all the nitty-gritty details that is suited for scholarship is another question. Also, whether a scholarly body might take on the work might not be as appealing either, because as Wikipedia found out, having vetting can slow down a project. They originally tried to do a peer-reviewed project, and it just ground to a halt compared to the development of Wikipedia. So although it's possible to build vetting later on, to graft it onto wikis, and it might be gradually done by a scholarly body, there's really no question that it's just too hard to keep up with wikis, in the sense that anybody off the street who's not prevented for breaking policies, that they have the ability to contribute their knowledge without having been invited. The site is an open invitation for others to join. So generally, it's hard to compete with that. But as I mentioned, I'm open to a potential of an administrative role, or perhaps a liaison with the institution of the learned, which liaises with the training institutes, for example, and it might be of interest. As far as one thing about the wiki, which really makes it easier for me, I think, to encourage people to join it without me feeling that I'm self-promoting so much, is the fact that we use, and this is typical on wikis, we use open content licenses. I won't go into all the details, it's time is too short, but basically the license allows other people to reuse the contents of Wikipedia under certain conditions. I do add a certain unusual condition that, well, it's not so unusual in the open source world, but maybe unusual on wikis, is that I ask people to sign over the rights of copyright to myself, so that in the future, which doesn't mean that I can remove any of the rights that the open content license gives, but which would allow me to change the open content license in the future, so that future contributions could build on the old contributions in a way that was compatible. At one point, Wikipedia had a problem because they decided to change their open content license, and that required them to fork so that all the old pages were under a different license. So this is meant to kind of allow us a greater flexibility. And also, if we wanted to allow the institutions to have even greater restrictive rights, so that, for example, they didn't need to share the same rights with others for any derivative works that they made, we could grant that to them, or, we'd have, it's under our control. Okay, another general policy is we try to encourage a balance between innovation, which might involve being bold, as Wikipedia calls it, and removing content or reorganizing it, and with the need for courtesy. We're very strongly, though, more so than Wikipedia, we try to really emphasize that we prefer moving to removing. So if somebody has started some concept and you think it's not quite adequate, we don't want you to just, even if you make otherwise a bunch of other great improvements, we don't want you to lose what was already there in some form. And if it needs to be, unless it was against one of the site policies, we want you to try to preserve it. Okay. Yeah, we just have some general formatting conventions, but those are not as, if you make some mistakes and you try contributing, we're forgiving with that, and we hope to just, but ideally we would enforce that well. For choosing suitable quotes for a page, one concept that's important is excuse me. One concept that is important is that we require that quotations be explicitly relevant to the page. This is trying to minimize questions that people might have a hard time to agree on a collective interpretation. So we limit it to quotes which are fairly explicit. I mean, we might have a heading which uses synonyms and summarizes, but it should generally be agreeable to pretty much any reasonable person if we're going to make a heading that is a summary of the quote. Now, there can be some cases where this is in doubt, but the idea is to try to make it easier for us to come to a resolution. So there could potentially be an infinity of quotations which an individual might consider relevant, but we don't want to let the page become too bloated with theoretical implications. However, we might, in a few cases, add questionable interpretations. So, for example, there's a quote on the leaves of Baha'u'llah that if one of them were to be claimed to be a manifestation of God, that those, as I recall, that we should accept it. And some have speculated this might refer to a future woman manifestation of God. But since that's not explicitly stated, it just says if that were to occur, it doesn't say it will occur. We put that in question mark, future manifestations of God, because but it's significant enough though to draw it out as, or there's another quote which seems to suggest that time travel may be possible. Well, some might view that as figurative, and they don't consider that that's literal. But we put it in a question mark because outwardly it seems to be suggesting that. We also allow closely derivative works at the current time, like study outlines. One thing we make good use of is see also sections. And also another policy we might use is we can use the to-dos for this page. We add a to-dos section. Now, for some people, this might seem a little bit informal, that you're describing what your to-dos are. But it helps to telegraph what we still want to do so that editors know how to improve the page. But also, even for regular visitors, if they see a link like, if we say something like, we should extract more quotations from such and such a link, then the user visiting our page can visit it and they can get more information in the here and now. And they might help us to actually complete the page. Okay, so there's a whole lot of importance to giving good nesting. One other approach I might share with my screen here is some of the quotations take a different form. So for example, on the question of the quotations on the status of the authenticity of the writings of the Buddha, we do also allow, in this case, bulleted summaries. The research department of the World Center does this also sometimes, where we link sometimes to multiple quotations which support a given point, and then we can include the quotations below. Okay. So another way besides the to-do section is we can also add a stub, which indicates that the page is just the stub and you're welcome to help develop it. But in general, I tend to find that to-dos are more useful. But there is a notion that, it may be different, it may be less familiar to some people coming from other projects, but it is going to be a fact of nature that the wiki is going to be a work in progress, that we can't possibly include all of the relevant quotations. And we sometimes fear that we may have to, that we may, if we particularly fear that the quotations that we have on a page are misrepresenting the topic, we may add a to-dos or a note that we really need to gather some more quotations. So for example, on the equality of men and women page, I happen to have gathered some quotations with sort of counterbalance quotations that take that to extremes. Like there are a few quotations about that, but those were just because I happened to gather those in the course of my work online, where the quotation came up. But I didn't have time to do a comprehensive, for such a vast topic as the equality of men and women. So that may be skewed, even though we may have a bunch of lights of guidance quotations, at least it still may be deficient. But you have to kind of live with that on the wiki and hopefully just improve it over time. But it also does speak to the need for a greater diversity and number of contributors. Okay. As far as the financing of the site, there's really not much to it. I own the domain myself, and the hosting had kindly been hosted previously by Jonah and then by myself and now by David Haslip. But it can be run on a cheap server, so there really are no great costs. But as far as sustainability, and this is really one of my greatest failures, I think, in the project, is that most of the quotations are by myself, about 98%. And although there are some other quotations from some others, including a few here, those tend to be by people who are already busy with other projects in the infrastructure of the Baha'i scholarship on the web. So I would really like to see that this be made more sustainable. We could potentially hire categorizers in some areas, but it's really not as much like Bahaipedia, where you can hire, or Bahai.works, where David might hire proofreaders. It's better that we have people more intimately familiar with the writings. I mentioned the origins already. We had originally been more of a compendium where we included, in addition to quotes, links to scholarship, provisional translations, allowing for Q&A and alternative interpretations on their own pages. But we've been moving away from that so as to ensure that there's a clean separation of concerns. Those might be valid areas for their own wikis to the extent they're not already covered on wikis like Bahaipedia. I might mention another thing that's changed is the fact that originally the main support I would get was from Jonah, who is all, of course, very busy with his site. But one positive development in addition to that, which came along much later, was out of relative long periods of lack of participation, where we started to have an informal chat group among those of us either maintaining or contributing to these other wikis. And although we're a little bit too busy to really help one another directly as much as I think we would like, it can be a great source of encouragement and assistance for us to share ideas and share what we're working on. So I just skipped to, as far as feedback on the site, just quickly. The site is not, its ranking is not particularly high, despite the fact that it predated Bahaipedia. Higher numbers being, or lower numbers being a higher, better rank. But it gives some idea that, it has been linked to from Wikipedia. That was a nice milestone, I think, that where people spontaneously added that there. There are some other tools that I could refer you to, but I think we've run out of time, that can be used in conjunction with Bahai9. And I think I'll just quickly add on this. I think, being able to use the site itself, like originally in the project, that was gratifying for myself that I could write. That was when you're not getting feedback, that can keep you going. And then seeing Wikipedia site from it, and then gradually getting some more personal feedback. But one thing I did to try to amplify this was I started sharing quotations and links to Bahai9, even though, as I mentioned, I was a little bit wary of a sense of self-promotion, but I wanted people to know that they could contribute in a way where, unlike a discussion forum, the quotes could get more organized over time. And so I started sharing those quotes. And as I did that, sometimes people would give more feedback and themselves would start sharing the links, but we're still very much lacking in terms of editors. Some other issues of mistrust, or maybe earlier on, especially of what wikis were and everything. Is, of course, it's naturally a wonder to people that anybody can edit the site initially. Let's see, and just generally a need for promoting lack of awareness. And then also I have some chronic health issues, which make it particularly difficult for me to concentrate, especially in areas that are not immediately under my familiar territory for me. So, and that can cause a problem that there are certain sections of the site which are still kind of, even prominent sections of the site which are kind of under construction, that there's sort of a legacy of the fact that that I thought these would be good categories and that might include relevance for scholarship, or, for example, listing people by disability. Well, that might be relevant for a list of notable Baha'is, or on Wikipedia, but there are not very many individuals mentioned in the writings to begin with. So there's not a great need to categorize people in such great depth, but I might still have those pages because it's been an issue for me to concentrate, to make all the decisions, to revise that and find the energy and willpower to get through that. So I think I'll add here, and I'm sorry we've run quite long on time, but if we still have time for questions, or I'll leave it to you, Graham, and thank you.
Well, Brett, thanks very much for that overview of Bahai9. I think everybody has gained a much deeper appreciation of the site. It seems to be a story of compendium meets hot links. You describe the site as being a compendium. I've seen your description of the site and its origins as in exploring this new media, seeing what the potential is, finding the areas of most value. Whereas a lot of compendiums will categorize material by type of publication, your compendium does a little bit of that, but it's really drawn us into the area of semantics and meanings of text. It's not just a compendium linking texts to their basic definitions, but you're looking for means of finding the deeper sense of meaning in these texts. And so you've gone to your interest in linguistics and classification by well, not just by subject, but by other types of conditions referred to in the text. So it's quite really a deep dive into the Baha'i writings. And I've gained a new appreciation for your site, and also an appreciation for its links to the sister sites and how it links to Baha'i Works and Baha'i Library and other sites. You've explained that well. So really great thanks from all of us who have been in this session for the presentation today. And I'll just open up now for some questions from our participants. We have people on board who are linguists, web hosts, chroniclers, IT specialists. So we should have a few questions for you. Can I invite someone to start off with a question for Brett? Thanks, Glenn.
Thank you, Brad. My question concerns the security of the site. I have had some experience with wikis in my professional life, and then I have had nothing to do with it recently. But is there some sort of an alert that you get when someone comes in and changes something? My question is, how do you guard against malicious people coming in and changing the information? It's very important that it be kept pristine, and I know you must have some measures in place to maintain that cleanliness, that purity.
Yeah, a great question. There are mechanisms for getting notified. Also, we can lock certain pages, like for example, the main page and a few template pages which are used everywhere. You know, we can lock them, or the about page, the policies or copyrights. Some of these pages we might, and even those pages, a person could add some comments in the discussion, because each page also has a discussion page, so they could leave their own comments there to suggest and edit. But generally, the idea is that you leave the door wide open, and then only after the fact, as necessary, you may need to shut the door. So people can be blocked by IP address, their account can be shut down. As far as notifications, and I saw this came up on, I think, Steve Cooney's presentation, or asked this question, I think, was about RSS readers. RSS, or ATOM, ATOM, is a certain mechanism by which you can subscribe to updates posted by the likes of a website. So the wiki, each of the different, there are a bunch of different RSS feeds. You can get, for example, you can get a feed of all of the changes to the site, so that you can get notified. Typically, people maybe poll with every 15 minutes, or you could poll every minute if you wanted to, but it would slow down your network to have this kind of connect. But you pretty much, we expect to find the spam, and if I don't find it too, there are other, I mean, I do tend to periodically do a comprehensive check of all the edits that were made, but it's always possible that I may be sleeping, I may be offline, whatever. And it may just be that temporarily the site is vandalized. So part of the site is vandalized. So there's that risk, but that's kind of a given territory with the wikis, and hopefully the more other Baha'is who are, start to get involved, even if if you just, for example, you can get a watch list on the wiki, you can watch pages of interest to you, and you could subscribe to that so that you get notified whenever your favorite pages are modified. So there are different mechanisms to. Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Brett.
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not sure where it was cut off, but just that there are mechanisms for us to handle it like that. You heard about the RSS I mentioned?
Yes, that's right. Look, thanks for that. Any other questions for Brett? Anton, please. Go ahead.
Thank you. My question, you mentioned about challenges. When you're talking about challenges, you mentioned mistrust. Can you elaborate more about this? What was that from your experience? Can you tell me more about it, please?
Sure. Well, initially, whether among institutions or just among that institutional issue was overcome. There was initially a misunderstanding, I think. I appealed it and it was overturned, but there had been an initial concern. It's sort of an ancillary issue, but I just mentioned it on the side. But for the bigger question that I was referring to was on the level of individuals, that whenever I tried to recruit people to, the wiki, I would just get people who would think, well, this is not run by an institution, or they might think that, oh, the internet is the bad place, or you can't have community on the internet, or, we should be away from. I just ran into a number of people because I really tried within local communities to try to win people over. And I think it really was, and people also hadn't heard of Wikipedia for a while. Our site started quite early on. I think as far, I have the history written down on one of our wiki sites, but I think as early as 2004, we were running Baha'i wikis, and it was just Wikipedia hadn't entered the public consciousness, I think. And I think after that happened, even though there was some controversy about it, like, living editors, the policy on that, there was some controversy, but I think that it got covered in the news and people started to become more aware of it. And then also the faith itself has, the institutions have, long been, for example, the World Center provided FTP copies of the writings. They allowed other sites to host the writings, but, it's their own copies of the writings. But when Bahai.org came along, there's also people who would say that, oh, if it's not on, we can't link to anything besides Bahai.org, even though there are many reasons, technical reasons, why you can get better features that are missing from Bahai.org. Or so anyways, this is that may not be specific enough, but just the general kind of concerns that I would run into from people.
Thanks for that, Brett. So I'd call those sort of legacy issues and education, but they're real, but they change over time as people learn more about the new technologies and capacities. This might be the final question from Steve. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Fascinating, Brett. I just got I'm looking at your main page, and there's a by type of material heading in, obviously my own fascination with books. I click on your secondary study books link. There's actually only one book there. What's the idea of this page? What's your vision for it? It's just got the brilliant proof.
Let me see here. Secondary study. What's the specific title?
Books.
Okay. Let me see. Yeah. Okay. So, so this is a good example. This is a page that really needs an editor to at least add probably a stub or something to indicate to-dos. But the reason this is not developed so well is because this is really because we really confine ourselves mostly to quotations about the writings. This page was intended to be more about books that were not from the central figures of the faith. So, and typically there aren't a lot of books that are mentioned, you know, maybe you won't find mentioned the Iliad and the Odyssey or whatever from Abdul Baha. Maybe you might find some text mentioned, but we could have a quote about that. So for example, the Brilliant Proof has a quote mentioning that Abdul Baha mentioning encouraging study of the book. So, but again, there are really major gaps and under construction areas. I mean, I could show you a curated list that would.
That's okay. So the idea is that these are literary references in the writings to books.
That would have something where we could include quotations about it. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, as you say, it needs some sort of context to encourage people to edit that. So yeah. So there's a lot of references, maybe not to printed books, but to, you know, well understood writings. You know, there's a lot of poetic references in the writings of Baha'u'llah, and, you know, insider knowledge about 1,000 years of Persian literature, whatever, that you could, you know, these are all sort of literary references to the educated and so forth. And so, yeah, so that's what that's about. Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, it's a big job trying to develop taxonomies and structuring and organizing the writings. I mean, just trying to figure that out, cataloging books is kind of my current challenge, and there's 50 ways to do it, and you've got to do it in a succinct kind of fashion. So I understand the challenge, but I guess, as you say, they're all experiments. You just keep trying to evolve it. Thanks very much for your presentation. It was very insightful.
Well, thanks very much for that, Steve. And thanks very much to Brett for this presentation today. This brings it to a close, and we look forward to seeing everybody next time around. Thanks very much, Brett.